This is Chef Zach Townsend with Dallas Chocolate Classes. We have more choices now for cocoa powders than ever before, and different cocoa powders can produce slightly different results in our baked goods and confections. So understanding them is a key to more chocolate success in the kitchen. Let's take a look to help you understand more about cocoa powder so that you can make the best choice for your goals. Simply put, cocoa powder is obtained by pulverizing the leftover remains of pressed chocolate liquor. Chocolate liquor is a sort of liquidy paste obtained by crushing and grinding shelled cocoa beans, referred to as nibs. The nibs are a combination of cacao fat, called cocoa butter, and cocoa solids. Using special machines, the chocolate liquor is pressed to extract most of the cocoa butter from it, and the dry remains of that process are then ground into what we know as cocoa powder. The process of extruding the cocoa butter from the chocolate liquor was developed by a Dutch chocolate maker. He also developed the process of using an alkali solution so that the dry remains would be less acidic. This also made the cocoa powder darker in color and more mellow in flavor. We refer to this as Dutch processed as a nod to its origins. When not treated in this way, the cocoa powder retains a lighter color and higher acidity, which we refer to as natural. So in sum, cocoa powders are marketed as two primary types, alkalized or non-alkalized. They do retain trace amounts of the cocoa butter, but more on that in a bit. Cocoa powder labels can have a lot of information, much of it meaning the same thing. First, make sure you're purchasing 100% cocoa powder and not a cocoa product containing sugar. It should say unsweetened on the package. If not, turn the package over and look at the ingredient list to make sure it contains no sugar and is just cocoa. You don't want to mistakenly purchase or try to substitute a sweetened cocoa product because you're adding unexpected sugar to your recipe and it isn't the same thing. Non-alkalized cocoa powders may say natural on the package or they may say non-alkalized. However, it's possible the package may say neither of these. This popular brand of natural cocoa powder does not use the words natural or non-alkalized on the package. The ingredients just say cocoa. So how do you know if it's natural or Dutch processed? The absence of the words Dutch processed or processed with alkali is a good indicator. If you don't see these descriptions, it should be non-alkalized cocoa powder. Again, a light brown color is another clue, but just keep in mind there are varying shades of light brown. A Dutch processed cocoa powder may indicate Dutch processed or just processed with alkali. A dark brown color is another indication. But again, there can be different shades of dark brown depending on its degree of alkalization, ranging all the way to what's referred to as black cocoa. Some manufacturers are developing natural cocoa powders with darker brown colors, so it's becoming harder to distinguish just by color. Another factor for both natural or Dutch cocoa powder is fat content. They can be low fat or high fat because they still contain traces of cocoa butter. It's rare to see them labeled this way, but here's one example where it is stated on the package. Otherwise, you have to check the label for the fat content as a percentage of total fat to total weight per serving. Fat content can have an impact on the moistness of your baked good, so this should also be considered when deciding on a cocoa powder to use. For baking and dessert making, you should have both types on hand, and preferably both low fat and high fat. Well-written recipes would typically indicate what type you need for the recipe's intended result, but you'll see it listed in different ways in cookbooks. Here's some recent examples of how cocoa powder is described in the ingredient list from popular cookbooks. Unsweetened alkalized cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder preferably Dutch processed cocoa powder, natural cocoa powder non-alkalized, natural cocoa powder, or even just cocoa. So you can see these two types can be referred to in different ways. For a recipe that just says cocoa powder, you might not be sure which type to use, and choosing one versus the other could yield very different results. Here's an example. This chocolate cake was made 3 times following the same instructions and ingredients precisely, but each time a different cocoa powder was used. The recipe calls for baking soda as its only leavener, which needs an acid to activate it and create rise. You can easily see the difference among the 3 versions of this cake. The Dutch processed cocoa powder created the darkest and shortest cake. Its reduced acidity produced little rise in the presence of the baking soda, which reacts with an acid to produce the carbon dioxide that lifts the cake. The natural cocoa powders created a cake lighter in color but also taller because their higher acidity levels activated the baking soda to create rise. However, you can see a difference between the high-fat and low-fat versions as well. The high-fat is slightly more moist and slightly shorter. So for baking performance, you might have to test with more than one cocoa powder to get the results you're after. For decorating and other uses where the acidity level is less critical, such as dusting chocolate truffles, the various shades and flavors of cocoa powders offer an opportunity to be creative with what you're making, so be sure to try different ones for more variation. 2 last points, you should become familiar with the flavor of each cocoa powder you keep on hand. But of course, unsweetened cocoa powders are never enjoyable to taste on their own, but a small taste will help you to get to know them better. Also, don't hesitate to get a little creative and blend cocoa powders together to create different shades and results. Again, if you substitute a particular cocoa powder type called for in your recipe, just be sure to test it at least once to make sure you get the results you're after. Be sure to leave a comment to let me know what results you've experienced and what cocoa powders you love and what is available in your market. Thank you for watching and supporting my channel to help you understand and enjoy working with chocolate more. And be sure to check out the description for more tips and extras.